And so we begin chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga. We'll begin this chapter with some salutations to my gurus. Vanchitam amritam yatu Shri Rupa Raghunathayo Tadane Truti Lesham Yaha Sahatena Narasingha Ka Pacharakari Siddhanta Sarasvati Samasama Bhakti Vedanta Sishyasa Vande Swami Narasingha Ka Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Iti Namine Vaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Verse 1. Arjuna Uvacha Jyayasi Che Karmanaste Mata Buddhir Janardana Tat Kim Karmani Gori Mam Niyojayasi Keshava. Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, if it is your opinion that wisdom is better than action, then why do you wish to engage me in such violent activities? Verse 2. Vyami Shrineva Bhakyena Buddha Moha Yasiva Me Tade Kambada Nischitya Yena Shreyo Aham Apnuyam. Your words seem to be contradictory, and my mind is now confused. Therefore, kindly tell me which particular path is most beneficial for me. Verse 3. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Lokesmin Divi Vidya Nista Puru Prokta Mayanaga Gana Yogena Sankhyanam Karma Yogena Yoginam. Bhagavan Sri Krishna said, O faultless one, previously I explained the two paths found in this world, the path of wisdom of the empirical philosophers and the path of action of those that must perform action. Verse 4. Na karmanam anaramban naiskarmyam purusos nute nacha sanyasana deva siddhim samabhigachati. A man cannot attain the state of divine consciousness free from material action simply by abstaining from action. Neither can perfection be attained simply by renunciation. Verse 5. Nahi kachit krishnam apijatu tistatya karam akrit karyate avasaha karma sarva prakriti jair gunai. One cannot abstain from activities even for a moment. Indeed, all living beings are forced to engage in activities due to the influence of the modes of material nature. Anuvritti, commentary by His Divine Grace Jagad Swami, Bhakti Gaurava Narasingha Maharaja. The purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to elevate one beyond the bodily concept of life to the plane of consciousness, or understanding the nature of the self. Sri Krishna has already established this in the second chapter, but it appears that Arjuna finds some contradiction in what Krishna has said. Arjuna asks Krishna to further explain wisdom in action so that he may follow the proper path. This confusion is common amongst novices. Should one be a philosopher who is indifferent to the affairs of the material world, or should one engage in one's prescribed duties? What is ultimately to be understood by Krishna's instruction is that both wisdom and proper engagement are interdependent. One is not complete without the other. Engagement, sometimes seen as spiritual practices without philosophy, is merely sentiment, and philosophy without practice is mental speculation. Religious practices without a solid philosophical basis often leads to fanaticism that results in destruction and death. Our modern world is all too aware of this. The interdependent relationship between philosophy and spiritual practice is indispensable for one who wants to achieve the perfection of human life. Action should be performed with proper knowledge. Only then does one achieve the proper result and is considered a true yogi. Verse 6. Karmendriyani samyamya ya asti manasa smaran indriyartam vimudatma mityachara sa uchate. One who controls the external senses, yet mentally dwells upon the sense objects, is said to be foolish and hypocritical. Verse 7. Yastvavindriyani manasa niyamyarabhate arjuna karmendriya kamar yogam ashakta savishishyati. However, that person who controls the senses with the mind and engages them in karma yoga, the path of selfless action, without attachment is superior, O Arjuna. Verse 8. Niyatam kuru karma tvam karma jiyayo hyakarmanaha shariraya tarpichate na prasideda karmanaha. You should perform your prescribed duties, since action is better than inaction. You cannot maintain your existence without action. Verse 9. Yagnardat karmano nyatra lokayam karma bandhanaha tadartam karma kunteya mukta sangha samachara. All activities are meant for sacrifice, yagna, to Vishnu. Other than that, all other activities bind one to this material world. O son of Kunti, work for him alone and be free from any attachment. Anuvritti commentary by Jagad Swami Bhakti Gaurava Narasingha Maharaja. The Vedic injunctions enjoin that all activities should be performed as an offering to Vishnu Krishna, Jagno by Vishnu. No embodied being can give up action even for a moment, because in the material world everyone is forced to act under the influence of the modes of nature. It is also said that the pure nature of the Atma is to be engaged in the spiritual activities of serving the Supreme Being, Krishna. Therefore, all activities are to be connected to and for the satisfaction of Vishnu Krishna. This is known as the constitutional position of the Atma. It is clear from the above verses that action is better than inaction. As it is said, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. If the senses are idle and one tries to empty the mind, then what usually transpires is that the mind becomes engaged in unproductive thoughts, and eventually the sense objects carry the mind and the senses away. The influence of the modes of material nature over the Atma is called Maya, or illusion. This Maya is the external energy of the absolute truth. When the Atma is separated or disconnected from the absolute truth by improper philosophical understanding or improper activities, the result is bewilderment, confusion, and samsara. Verse 10. Sahajagna prajashrispa puruvacha prajapati anena prasavishyadvam esavospisista kamaduk. In the beginning of creation, Brahma created mankind along with the system of sacrifice and said, "Through this sacrifice may you prosper, may it fulfill all your desires." Verse 11. Devan bhavayatanena te deva bhavayantuva parasparam bhavayanta shreya param avapsyata. The demigods being satisfied with sacrifices will also satisfy you. By mutually pleasing each other, you will attain the highest benefit. Verse 12. Istan bogam hiyo deva dashanti jagna bhavitaha ter datam apradayabhyo yo bhunkte stena eva saha. Being satisfied by your performance of sacrifices, the demigods will bestow upon you all the necessities of life. But one who enjoys these gifts without offering them to the demigods is a thief. Verse 13. Yagna shistasina shanto muchanti sarva kilbisai bunjate twabagam papaye pachanjat makaranat. Enlightened individuals are liberated from all types of impiety by accepting the remnants of foodstuffs offered in sacrifice. However, those who only cook for themselves perpetuate their own bondage. Verse 14. Anan bhavante bhutani paranyadana sambhavaha yajnad bhavati parjanyo yajna karma samubhavaha. All living beings subsist on food, and food is produced by rain. Rain is produced due to the performance of sacrifice, and sacrifice is born of prescribed activities. Anuvritti commentary by Jagad Swami Bhakti Gaurava Narasingha Maharaja. In verse 10, Brahma is mentioned as the creator. According to the Vedas, Brahma is the first living being in the universe and is manifest directly by Vishnu. Brahma's function is as the secondary creator of the planetary systems. In modern times, some atheistic thinkers, such as Professor Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist from Oxford University, have conceded that aliens from another planet may have possibly seeded life on Earth. Far-fetched as this may sound to some of us, the idea does come very close to the truth. The ancient texts of India state that Brahma resides in the highest realm in the universe known as Satyaloka. Some of the offspring of Brahma, known as the Prajapatis, are then sent forth to seed life throughout the cosmos. But rather than look at Brahma as an alien, the Vedic texts describe him as the father of all living beings in the material world. Since Western civilization first came in contact with the pantheon of Vedic demigods, there has always been the speculation that the Vedic people, often referred to as Hindus, were pagans. Pagan meaning the worshippers of many gods and not one supreme god. Thus, Western observers conclude that monotheism, the worship or reverence of one supreme god, originated with the Abrahamic religions of the West. This, however, is not a fact. The Vedic pantheon does indeed include many lesser demigods, but the Vedic texts are quite clear that there is only one supreme being or superconsciousness that is above all. That is always referred to as Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, Vishnu, or Krishna. For example, the Rig Veda states as follows: Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sadapashanti Suryaha Diviva Chakshur Atatam. The divine feet of Vishnu are above all, like the sun over our heads. His holy feet are like the vigilant eye of a grand guardian over our heads like the sun. End quote. Srimad Bhagavatam says, Eta kamsa kalapumsaha Krishna tu Bhagavan svayam. The various avatars are either plenary expansions or parts of plenary expansions, but Sri Krishna is the original source of all these avatars. That was Srimad Bhagavatam. Historically speaking, it is erroneous to assume that monotheism was developed by Abrahamic civilizations independent of any outside influence. In fact, The Abrahamic religions borrowed the idea of monotheism from the Persians after King Cyrus subjugated Babylon and Judea circa 500 BCE. Prior to the arrival of the Persians and continuing into the 2nd and 3rd centuries, Judaism and Christianity were known to have belief systems based on one or more gods. Thus, monotheism only gradually developed among the Abrahamic religions. Since the monotheistic concept found in the Vedas is much older than the Abrahamic religions, it is only logical to conclude that the latter borrowed their thinking from the former. During the interim, the Persians, under the influence of Zoroaster, took the monotheistic philosophy from India and then transmitted it to the Middle Eastern civilizations. Indeed, monotheism has always been the central theme of India's Vedic literature. However, failing to look deeply into the philosophy of the Vedas, or possibly being culturally intimidated by the superiority of Vedic knowledge as opposed to Western philosophies and religions, Eurocentric academics and fundamental religionists have marginalized the ancient Vedic civilization of India. The German scholar Max Müller propagated further misinformation on this subject in the 19th century with the invention of the Aryan invasion theory, stating that the Vedic civilization did not originate in India. Yet all this is quite far from the truth. According to Müller, the Aryans were a nomadic tribe from Europe who invaded India. Yet there's no evidence that the Aryans were nomads. In fact, to suggest that a nomadic tribe of barbarians wrote literature of such profound wisdom as the Vedas defies imagination. Furthermore, within the Vedas, there's no mention whatsoever of an original homeland, and archaeologically, there's a complete lack of evidence to prove an invasion ever occurred. It can only be concluded that the Aryan people and Vedic knowledge were always indigenous to India. The Vedic knowledge is that Vishnu Krishna is supreme, and the lesser gods and goddesses such as Brahma, Shiva, Ganesh, Kartikeya, Kali, and Sarasvati, etc., are actually servants of the Supreme Being and are empowered with the duties of managing the universal affairs of material nature. In the above verses, Sri Krishna recommends that offerings should be made to the demigods, and thus the demigods will be pleased to bestow unto humanity all the necessities of life. This is, in short, a universal law of taxation. In other words, we must give the demigods their dues. It is also intrinsic to the nature of the Atma to perform service and sacrifice. Constitutionally, the Atma, being part of the organic whole, the absolute truth, is duty-bound to serve the whole, both in this life and in eternity. When sacrifice or offerings are made to Vishnu, such as fruits, vegetables, etc., then one's senses become purified by eating the remnants of such offerings. But if one takes the things of this world without first acknowledging to whom they actually belong, then one simply incurs a karmic reaction. This also includes our daily food that should first be offered to Vishnu Krishna. It will be explained by Sri Krishna later in Bhagavad Gita that these food offerings should be comprised of vegetables, fruits, milk products, flowers, etc. Non-vegetarian food items cannot be offered to Vishnu or Krishna. Consequently, the servants of Vishnu Krishna are vegetarian. Krishna will also explain that those who serve the absolute truth are not duty-bound to serve the demigods, nor are they bound by any other social considerations. I'll add a note here on this particular segment. There's always an argument amongst the vegetarians and vegans and meat eaters. And sometimes the meat eater will put forth the argument that, well, you're killing things also. You're killing the vegetables, and that's causing suffering to living entities. The truth is the meat eaters are correct on this, that vegetarians, vegans, and others who don't eat meat, they're also causing suffering. They're causing living entities to suffer. Now, it may be argued that, well, it's less suffering and it's less karma to eat vegetables than it is to kill and eat an animal, and that's correct. One time a devotee of Krishna was delivering a lecture, and he asked his audience, he knew most of them were vegetarians, he knew most of them were devotees, and he asked the questions, how many people here like the taste of meat? And nobody raised their hand. And then he said, I do. I like the taste of meat. The only reason that I don't eat it is because we cannot offer it to Krishna. And that is the real answer here to this question. That yes, if Krishna accepted meat offerings, then we would offer them and we would eat meat. But he doesn't, so we don't. We simply want to please Krishna. That is our goal of life. And that's the most compelling argument that I ever heard concerning whether one should be a meat eater or a vegetarian. Really, the devotees of Krishna are not really vegetarians either. We are Krishnarians. We eat what Krishna likes to eat. And reality is that there are some vegetables also that Krishna does not like to eat. Therefore, we do not offer them and we try not to eat them. Krishna, being the most intelligent person in creation, knows what to eat. And so we simply follow his instructions and direction on the matter of eating. We first offer to Krishna, and then we partake of the prasadam. Prasadam means the mercy of Krishna. When Krishna touches whatever is offered, then it becomes a spiritual element. No longer is it considered material. Then the simple act of eating becomes a spiritual affair. So the devotees of Krishna, actually, we do not eat. We honor the prasadam. We honor the mercy of Krishna that comes in the form of the things that he accepts and we partake of.